So this is the second part of our discussion on lists. This is Python tutorial on ZomCast 17, December 18, 2020. And today we will be talking about some new types of lists that we didn't discuss in the previous session, and they are called tuples and dictionaries. Let's start with tuples because they are a little bit easier to understand. So I switch over to VS Code, and then we go ahead and create a simple tuple to see how they work. There we go. So I close the terminal, and here I'm going to create a simple tuple. First of all, let's imagine what a tuple is. In fact, when you create a simple list using a comma, and you separate the items in your list with a comma, and don't enclose them into something like curly braces or brackets, we call that tuples in Python. And there are some tips that you need to be careful in order to uh, tell Python that this is gonna be as a tuple and not as a list or some other iterable thing. I'm gonna create a tuple and name it tuple, for example, or let's call it my tuple, and I create a list of numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As you can see, I don't enclose them into something. I just mention the items one by one and separate them with a colon, with a comma. And if we print them now, for example, print, again I use f string, this is my tuple, and then I put it into my tuple in the curly braces. If we run it, we can see that the tuple is printed. There we go. So you can easily create tuples using this syntax, just separating your items using comma. But there's something very important about tuples. Tuples are a type of data, a type of data structure in Python. And in order for it to work, actually, sometimes you have to enclose it into something. And what is that something that I'm talking about? For example, imagine you have to pass in your tuple to a function, like to a function that is supposed to print these numbers one by one, or do some mathematical operation on the members of this tuple. In order to do that, you need to specify the tuple inside parentheses. And here's where parentheses is important and is necessary to be mentioned. For example, I have a function like math or tuple math. By the way, I haven't talked about functions yet, so let's skip this part. No function. Just remember, whenever you create a tuple and you want to use it inside some other operation, you need to enclose it inside parentheses. So the same tuple that I have defined here can be rephrased to something starting with a parentheses, with a left parenthesis, and ending with a right parenthesis. And then this is your tuple. No difference is seen if you run this. It's the same output that we got from the previous run. In the previous one, we didn't have parentheses. You see that there's no difference in the output. Both of them display the numbers inside the parentheses. Another thing that sometimes you need to be aware of is that a tuple with one member, if you need to use a tuple with one member, you often need to add a trailing comma after it, because this tells Python that this is not as a normal number, this is a tuple, and this is part of a list, a special list that Python calls tuple. There are a few cases and occasions that you will find this useful. Whenever you are passing again some tuple to a function, you need to define it this way, and this helps Python understand that you mean a tuple with a single member that is 1 and not number 1. If I remove the comma, Python will interpret this as just an integer that is equal to 1. But I add comma anyways, so you would understand that this is tuple, and Python would understand that this is a tuple, and Python can do list operations on it. Okay, that's it for tuple. And now let's talk about the other type of list. Actually, before going forward and talking about the other type, that is dictionary and is very common and popular in Python, I'm going to talk a little bit about iterating between the items in a tuple. Note that first of all, remember that a tuple doesn't have to be consistent. What I mean by this is that you can have different types of data inside your tuple. It doesn't have to be integer, all of them, or all of them string. You can have different types. For example, I have 1, then 2 float. The first one is integer, the second one is float. The third one is, for example, John. The fourth one is, for example, another structure even. You can even add another data structure here, like let's say A, B, and C. A list containing 3 characters A, B, and C. And if we print them, the print function will print them. There's no problem in it. And if you want to iterate between them, it's simply the same way as we did in previous lists. For example, for every member, I type for I in my tuple. For every member inside this tuple, print it. Print member tuple member f then I. And this just prints out all the members of the tuple, which include our nested list that in turn includes A, B, and C, and it will be printed. Let's run it to see that in action. There we go. You see that tuple member 1, tuple member 2, John, and the nested list is printed. Again, you might find some some uses for this in your application, but it's good to be aware of these capabilities in Python. Okay, now let's move ahead and talk about dictionaries. Dictionaries are something that I think other programming languages have to some extent. For example, if you come from a PHP language background, PHP has something called associative arrays. And in those arrays, you create an array like this with the PHP 7 syntax with brackets, and then you say, for example, A is associated with 1, then you say B is associated with 10, for example, and C is associated with another array, for example, that in turn is another associative array, like X is associated with 1000, and so on. Python doesn't have the same thing, but instead, Python has something called dictionary. And dictionaries in Python are created using curly braces. So I remove the brackets including these data items, and I put them inside a pair of curly braces, and then I separate the keys. As you might know, the data item from which we associate which we associate to something, to some data item, is called a key, and this is a common practice in a lot of languages, including Python and PHP. So A will be our key and 1 will be our data. Instead of equal and the greater than operator, we use colon in Python. So I remove the previous PHP-like operators and change them to this. And also, what is this? Since this is also going to be acting as a nested dictionary, I have to change it from brackets to curly braces. So now this will be understood by Python as a dictionary. And dictionary can be very useful, in fact. Why? For example, you might have a logger. You might decide to implement a custom logger for your application and define different logger files, different log handlers to different levels. And then in order to do that easily, you can just create a dictionary like this, and for example, say info. The info level, I wanted to go to this file, for example, go to app log info.log, and I want error, for example, to be logged into app log error.log, and I want debug level information to be logged inside app log debug.log, and I want, these are the common debugging levels that are used in Python. And you can easily create a dictionary to access them and to define these files. So if we want to, for example, print them, it's better to give them a name. So I give this a name of the first dictionary, like dictionary, or dict1, and this is dict2. In order to print them, you can easily use them inside print. So remember, with if string and then dictionary 1 dict1, then \n to go to the next line, and then print dictionary 2, then curly braces dict2, and this will print them. Let's run it to see if everything is working as expected. There we go. Dictionary 1 is printed and dictionary 2 is printed. The print is not very beautiful, but it works anyways, because you see that info is associated with info.log and error with error.log, and so on and so forth. Something important about actually accessing the information inside dictionaries is you should know how to access a value associated with a key inside a dictionary. And fortunately, it's very similar to PHP for those who have a little bit of PHP background, and for those who don't, it's done using the index that is received from the keys of your dictionary. For example, if I want to see the path to my error log file, I can say dictionary 2, please give me the data associated with error. How I do it, I say print error log file, f string again, I put it inside curly braces, and I say dict2 get, then I enter the key. The key is called error, and this will give me that thing, give me the value associated with the error key. What's the problem? Why do we have a syntax error here? The reason why we get a syntax error here is that we cannot insert the string delimiters single quotation inside the outer single quotations that are the boundaries and enclosures of our string. In order to use it easily, we can change the outer enclosing quotations to double quotations, and the problem will be solved actually. There we go. Now we can have as many single quotations inside our double quotation as possible, as we want. Let's run it and see what the value associated with the error key is. There we go. Error log file is app log error.log. Very good. But this is not the only way to access a data item inside the dictionary. You can in fact use a simpler method. Here we use the get method from dictionary. So using get. The other one is using a single operator, that is index operator, you can call it, or just just the bracket error log file using brackets. And the way we use it is dict2 and then the bracket, and then the key, just like this. And this will give us the value associated with this key in our dictionary. If we run it, there we go. Both of them work the same way, but you can see that the second format is easier to understand and use, and even and probably less error prone. With the get one, you might get some errors and mistake it for some other methods. So that's it for accessing data items inside dictionaries. And remember, dictionaries are a very important part of Python, so you need to do some practice and learn about them as much as possible. And before I wrap up this section of the tutorial, let me talk a little bit about iterating between the items inside a dictionary. You have a couple of items inside a dictionary and you want to access them one by one and see what you want to do on them, some operation. In order to do that, we can use exactly the same method that we had in our previous lists. So print operating on the like files dictionary, then we create a for loop for item in dictionary 2, dict2. We can read them one by one. F like file item, because we know that this is a single item that includes the key and the value. So in order to access the value, you need to address the key. So I say item, and then actually there's something missing here, item and the key, because we don't have access to the key, and dictionaries are a little bit different to iterate. If we print this as item now, it will work, but it will give us both the key and the value. But if you want to get only the value, it's a little bit different syntax that you need to use. So let's run this for now. You see, like file, it only gives us the key. Yeah, it only gives us the key and not the value. But in order to get the value, we need to see another syntax. Let me check it. docs.python.org/tutorial. And if we check out the dictionary section, and then we have actually a part that is about looping techniques, called looping techniques, just below the dictionary's title, 5.6. Let's find the dictionaries, some dictionary example here. Let me share the window with you. I suppose you see it now. And we should find the dictionary example that has keys, some keys and some values. Then see how it iterates between them. Yeah, this is one example. Dictionaries. Okay, there we go. When looping through dictionaries, the key and the corresponding value can be retrieved at the same time using the items method. So we say items, we say key value for key value in our dictionary.items, and then we have both the key and the value. So I change my code in this section a little bit. I say dict.dict2.items. When calling this method from the dictionary class, it gives us the key and value at the same time. So for item, this time we say for key and value in dictionary.items, and like file for key is equal to value. If you print it, it will display it correctly. For info, we have app-like info, and for error, we have app-like error, and so on and so forth. There are some usages that you will find this useful. It is a common pattern that is used in a lot of Python applications for accessing dictionary items. Note that in order to create the dictionary, we simply use the pair of curly braces and then enter one key and a value associated with it. One thing that I need to mention is that you don't have to use the same type of data. I could have used a key value that is just an integer and is associated with some string, or associate an integer to another integer, and the data doesn't have to be consistent, and all of them don't have to be the same type. It's you are free to do whatever you want with your dictionary as long as you respect the rules of creation for the dictionary and the syntax. For example, how to separate the items. For example, you cannot have a semicolon between the items. So you are only allowed to add, to add comma between the items, as you are used to in a lot of dictionary types, in other list types in the Python language. And also, another way to create a dictionary is using the dictionary constructor. For example, I could have created this dictionary using the dict constructor, and this dict constructor receives one key and an associated value, as you can see in this example in the documentation pop-up. Dict 1 equals 1, for example, 2 equals 2. So I can say, for example, info equals app log info.log, and error equals app log error.log. You see that we can easily reformat the previous definition to this format, but it's a little bit cumbersome, and you might not prefer to use this format. Just remember, you don't have to specify the key inside comma. Inside quotation. You just specify the name of the key, something like a parameter name, and you never put a parameter name inside quotations, whether it's single quotation or double quotation. So actually, let's change this dictionary type to the second format and I want to show you that this works exactly the same way. The output doesn't change. So I say dict and enclose it with parentheses, and then info is equal to this, like that info, error is equal to that, debug is equal to debug.log. And as I mentioned, you must not put your keys inside quotations, and this is the difference that it has from the first format of creating dictionaries: info, error, and debug. You just specify your pairs in the form of key equals value. If I run this, you will get the same output because it's essentially the same dictionary but defined in another way with another syntax. I hope that this gives you a good sense of how tuples and dictionaries work in Python. It's a very important topic, but fortunately easy to understand to some extent. If you have, however, some questions on the dictionaries or you want some aspects to be discussed more, please let me know in the comments section. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and let me know what you think of the video in the comments section. And that's it for the tutorial section. Just before I wrap up the video, let's talk about a little bit about the recent events in the previous week. We had a very important event that dealt with cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, especially because Bitcoin had just one very important record last week, and in fact it was yesterday that it hit above 23,000, and it went almost near or almost close to 24,000, and it was a very important record that was unprecedented in maybe in three years, yeah, after its previous record that was about, I think, 19,000, that was about near 20,000 in 2017. Now it's reached 23, and it went actually above 23,000 yesterday, and it was very important. In terms of financial dynamics in especially the cryptocurrencies market. So another thing that I want to talk about, yeah, that's it. The only thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of the events of the last week was Bitcoin's all-time high record. And that's it for this week's ZomCast. I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next week. Take care.